So there we go, we've started recording. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Donna to come up and give a conversation and tell us a bit about the mental health first aid approach that they do use. Followed by that, we'll have an experience from someone who uses something else. So there'll be a video about an alternative, i.e. a non-mental health first aid approach. Then we will have a lived experience perspective from one of our European in Stigma champions who is in employment. And then, of course, we'll have some time for questions. You might want to share some of your own experiences. You might have different experiences to those that we're here today. You're very welcome to pop some questions into the chat, but what we will do is go through each three presentations first, because it might be that the second or the third presentation answers one of your questions. But you're very welcome to think of your questions as we go, and we will definitely give you an opportunity to speak. So yeah, without further ado, Donna, if you would like to come up, please.
Good afternoon, everybody. So my name is Donna Parkinson, and I'm the Senior HR Business Partner at Portakabin, who have our head offices here in York. And this is just an image of one of our head office buildings. Believe it or not, that is actually a Portakabin building, not one of those little leaky classrooms that you may remember from your school days. So what I wanted to do very first of all, just do a very brief introduction to Portakabin. So we are the market leader in the design, manufacture and installation of modular buildings. We do a lot in healthcare, education, and the private sector. The biggest private sector building we've just put in is actually at Brentford Football Club for their training ground. So if you want to have a look at that, that's another example of what brilliant work that we can do at Portakabin. And we are based in UK, Ireland, France, Germany, Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands. So we've got quite a wide reach. But for the size of our business, we've got about just over 2,300 colleagues. So in many respects, we're a small business as well, but we do a lot for our colleagues in the sphere of mental health first aid and health and wellbeing in general. So I wanted to introduce to you our vision. So without any good health and wellbeing approach, you need to have a very clear vision and strategic approach. And this essentially is our vision at Portakabin. I won't read it out, you're all able to read, but it's all about providing an environment so that all of our colleagues can be the best version of themselves. And this aligns with our strategic vision of our business.
Move that on the screen, Donna, just whilst you move.
So the benefits of supporting mental health. So they're all listed here, of course. But we as a business believe that by having mental health first aiders in the business was the right approach for us, along with a robust network of support for the mental health first aiders and also additional signposted support for colleagues to this language training. So we recognised very early on that having mental health first aiders in the business for the Portakabin business was the right thing to do. And so all the benefits were there. So what did we do? Well, first of all, we made sure that we had all the support mechanisms in place. So we had all of our external signposting, which I'll go into very shortly. And then when Karina, my health and wellbeing specialist at Portakabin, were putting forward to our business about having mental health first aiders, we were very clear that we wanted to have a very robust approach to actually the recruitment of our mental health first aiders. So it wasn't voluntary. It wasn't oh, that person will be a good mental health first aider, let's go and ask them to be one. We actually did an active recruitment campaign within our population to actually ask them, does anyone actually want to be a mental health first aider? And then anyone who did, they had to go through a rigorous application. So the first thing was they had to fill out an application form, and it asks these questions. What does mental health mean to you? Why do you want to become a mental health first aider? What do you feel you could bring to the role? And if they hadn't actually any previous qualifications, so they may have already been a mental health first aider in a previous role, and that's becoming more prevalent now since mental health first aiders, there's more and more people being trained. And if they've got any experience, and that could be personal experience, friends, family, work-related experience as well of mental health, any personal qualities, for example, listening skills, empathy. Then we've pointed out that as a mental health first aider, they might have to deal with situations while they're at working, and could they actually afford the time to actually come away from their work activities to be able to support a person that was in need. And then another piece that both Karina and I were very passionate about was about safe boundaries and personal well-being and self-care. So we asked in the application form, how do they make sure that they maintain those? And that made people actually really think about why they wanted to be a mental health first and what they were going to bring to that role. We then, as part of the application process, asked them to make sure they read and fully understand the mental health role profile, which we created. We asked them to be able to commit to carrying out the role, to make sure that they attend the training and also attend mental health first aid network meetings, which I'll go into shortly. And obviously that their manager was aware that they're going to be a mental health first aider or applying to be a mental health first aider. And we felt that was important too, so that a manager, you know, it's like when you're really busy and they go, what have you been doing for the last half an hour? I've actually been supporting a colleague in crisis. All right, fine, fair enough. Or words to that effect. So it's just that the line manager was kept informed. Following a person's application, we put in place a selection criteria like you would with any form of recruitment, just to make sure that we fully assessed if that person was right for that role. They were going into it for the right reasons, that they did have the right level of empathy, that they did have the right level of skill. Once they'd been approved to go for the training, they then signed up to some principles. So that went through, it's a document, it's a couple of pages long. And essentially it talks about the role as a mental health first aider, about confidentiality and maintenance of records, talked about the training that they'll go through, the fundamental principles that these are the things that we put together, but it's also common sense from many respects. At Portakabin, our fundamental principle is zero harm, whether that be physical health or mental health. We felt it was very important that we put that in, about being trustworthy and responsible. So you're not going to be gossiping. Not that anyone would, but again, reverts back to the reasons why a person's becoming a mental health first aider. Respecting the dignity and the rights of individuals, being non-judgmental, and about integrity and self-responsibility. And then we have the responsibilities piece as well within that. So we've been very clear at the outset of when we were recruiting our mental health first aiders, we were very clear with them what was expected of them in the role, what we were wanting them to be doing. They're also our wellbeing champions as well. And that's also built into the role profile and the principles. So they're there also not just to be there to support a colleague in crisis, but also they're also there to help us with our initiatives that we do in the health and wellbeing sphere. Just check my notes to make sure I'm not missing anything. Once a person has been selected, they've signed up to the principles, they then have their training. So they all do the 2-day mental health first aid course, which is licensed through the Mental Health First Aid England. What I do want to put here is that we made the decision early on that we were going to train an in-house trainer, which was obviously a large initial cost, about £2,000-3,000, I think it was, something like that. But because we've trained so many people and we have quite a lot of refresher training, we have 1-day training, half-day training for other individuals as well. We felt as a business for us, it was more cost effective to do that. But there is obviously external providers out there. So again, as a business, you may need to make the decision as to what is right for you and your business and what budgets you've got available to you, what levels of training you're going to be doing, the frequency of that training, the volume of that training. So it's basically a cost benefit analysis of the different approaches that you want to take. In addition to the 2-day Mental Health First Aid England course, before Mental Health First Aid England rewrote their training, which they launched earlier on this year, they didn't have any training in there about safeguarding and boundaries. So we actually wrote our own in-house training program in relation to that. So our mental health first aiders attended a half-day training session on safeguarding and boundaries before going on the 2-day training. In addition to that, they all attend Safe Talk, which is through Living Works. Again, our mental health first aid trainer is also trained to deliver that training as well in-house, which is a half-day workshop and focuses on suicide alertness. Given the demographic of our employees, it is a construction environment. It's a male-dominated environment. The age profile of most of those gentlemen are in what would be referred to as the high-risk age range. So we felt that actually having a number of people trained in the business on suicide alertness was very important to us. So our mental health first aiders attend that, but it's also open to every other member of staff. I think it's fair to say we've got over 200 people in the Portakabin business that are trained as suicide alert colleagues. They also attend training on menopause champion training that we have. We use an external provider for that. And they're also required to attend a half-day refresher course annually and do the 2-day training every 3 years. So that's the training piece. And then in addition to that, we have what we refer to as our mental health first aid support network. So this is a monthly meeting. It's by Zoom or in person. As I said, we talked through the principles. It's mandated they have to attend a minimum of 2 network meetings a year. Given that we have 11 a year, that's not outside the realms of possibility. It's only an hour. And Karina leads these meetings, and essentially it acts as a safe space and a confidential space for the MHFAs to reflect on the support that they're giving, sharing any learnings within the bounds of confidentiality, obviously. And it's also another opportunity for further learning, skills practice, and we also have guest speakers. So we have had training or further training on, again, safeguarding, boundaries, complex emotions, anger, shame, grief, loss, bereavement, self-care, and compassion fatigue. We feel it's very important that you don't just do the 2-day mental health first aid training and they go right off you pop. You're there if someone has a crisis. It's very, very important that you safeguard those mental health first aiders, that you're having check-ins with them. They've got an opportunity. They're not counsellors. They're not a person to be following up on training. They're there like a physical first aider. They're there for that immediate crisis. But as we know, when a person's in immediate crisis, it can take quite an emotional toll on those that are supporting them. So we find it very important that these network meetings take place. In addition to that, a reference, we have guest speakers. So we have had 3 guest speakers last year. They've all come from charities. They're all external to the business. We didn't pay them. We donated to their charity, but we didn't actually pay them to speak. So again, they were doing it off of their own volition. And those 3 subjects was suicide. It was a lived experience of suicide, a lived experience on self-harm, and a lived experience on food eating disorders. And those lived experiences really helped our mental health first aiders get context, sometimes around why a person may be going through crisis, but they're by no means experts on those subjects. It's an educational piece. And we do actually open out those, when we have guest speakers, we actually open it out to people outside of our mental health first aid network as well. We open it up to our colleagues to attend. And the last session had quite a good attendance from memory. So what else have we got? So we've got lots of various tools that we use to support mental health first aid in Portakabin. So like I said, we've got our network, mental health first aiders. We've got over 70 mental health first aiders, and all of our HR team are also trained to be mental health first aiders as well. We have a 1-day mental health training for managers. So all of our managers go through a 1-day training program. It's basically covers exactly the same detail of what a mental health first aid is, but more condensed. And then we have the half-day training for all of our colleagues, which is delivered either face-to-face or via online. And again, that's delivered by our in-house trainer. As I've already referenced, we have our Safe Talk training. We have a wellbeing calendar with monthly campaigns that are supported by our Mental Health First Aid Network. We have a wellbeing app. It's a third-party provider. It's all confidential. We use a company called Everymind, which has got a whole raft of information and support. We've got it automatically uploaded onto our company mobile phone. So anyone who's got a company mobile phone, it's automatically on there, and a person can just go onto Play Store or App Store and download it themselves. And all they have to do is enter a code that's specific to Portakabin so that they can access materials that are on there. In addition to that, we have a wellbeing workshop for all new starters. So at Portakabin, we have what we refer to as a welcome day, where every new starter, whether it's in the UK or Europe, will come to our head office in York, have a full day where they'll learn about a whole raft of things. And then they go through a session that purely about health and wellbeing at Portakabin, our strategy, the mental health resources. We have a guest speaker, which one of our mental health first aiders will do a guest speaker spot to talk about the mental health first aiders, their role and what support is available. We have an EAP, which we use for signposting. We also have CBT provision through a third party. We have counselling through our occupational health provider. We have all sorts of mechanisms to signpost. Again, mental health first aiders are not there to fix a problem, they're there to signpost, typically as well to the individual's GP as well. And we've also got our wellbeing intranet and manager portals. So we have on our intranet a whole raft of support services signposted for our colleagues, but then we have a manager specific, which we refer to as Manager Essentials, which is for line managers themselves so that they can support their colleagues as well and their direct reports. So just very quickly, because I'm conscious of the time, the role of the line manager. So it's not all about the mental health first aiders, it's all about the role of the line manager in supporting their colleagues. I won't talk through this list, but essentially this is what the line manager is responsible for. So if I pick a few bits out here, supportive discussions where a mental health concern is highlighted, supporting engagement with awareness campaigns, having regular check-ins with colleagues. How is their workload? Are they clear on their responsibilities? Do they have clear objectives? All these sorts of things that you would expect a line manager to be doing anyway, but we reinforce it, and we also dovetail it in with the mental health first aid training that they do as well. And this is just kind of a slide on our measures and key indicators. So we do assess how well our support services are going. So we have our engagement survey outputs where we have a number of questions around wellbeing. We have views and engagement on our health and wellbeing focused communications. We have an in-house comms team. So we know how many people have actually clicked on the email, how many people have actually clicked through onto any of the links that we've put within those emails. It really looks at our engagement and our communications. We have learner differential feedback on all of our courses that we do, as in what did you know about this subject before? What do you know about this subject now you've attended? Our mental health first aiders do statistics, so they report on a monthly basis, confidentially, obviously, no names, just essentially how much time they spent giving mental health support, what were the main subjects, and we have a drop-down list of all the subjects so that we can also monitor and have a look at, is there any specific areas that we've got points of concern that we as a business need to look at and address and put mechanisms in place. And we do all the other bits and pieces as well that you'd find standard in any business, sickness absence, occupational health referrals, turnover. And we also critically review our exit interview data as well, because we ask questions in there about well-being as well. It's just because a person's leaving doesn't mean that their viewpoint isn't important, and particularly if a person's leaving for well-being reasons, not necessarily work-related, sometimes, well, most of the time actually it's personal, but we want to drill into it and what can we do as a business to support. So just to finish off then, really, some questions for you to consider. What is the approach of health and wellbeing in your organisation? What does health and wellbeing mean to your line managers? And what support does your business need that supports both your health and wellbeing strategy and your business strategy? So first is next steps, consider your health and wellbeing strategy, and it needs to suit your business and fit with your company culture. One size does not fit all. What would have the most impact on your business? Just because all this stuff works for Portakabin does not necessarily mean it works for you. Have a very robust process. So if you are going to go down the mental health first aider route, make sure you have a really good, robust process in terms of how you recruit those mental health first aiders. Are they very clear at what is expected of them and what they're going to be doing, and what support mechanisms you're going to put in place to support them? And similarly, what signposting can they signpost their colleagues to if they are in crisis? So there's no point having your mental health first aiders and having no signposting, because that kind of defeats the object. Okay, so I'll give you back to Emma. Not far over.
Brilliant, thank you, Donna. And I know whilst you've been up here, you can't see the chat, but there's been a really positive comment from someone who's online saying it's fantastic what Portakabin are doing with the wraparound things. And so yeah, some positive feedback on that already. Thank you. What we'll move on to next is an alternative approach. So we've heard about a mental health first aid approach, and we're now going to hear from a business which has an approach which doesn't include the use of mental health first aiders. And hopefully by the powers of technology.
Hello, my name's Debbie Bullock, and I'm the Wellbeing Lead and Interim Head of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion at Aviva. I'm really sorry I can't be with you in person at the event today, but I'm actually looking after my own wellbeing on holiday, fully resting, relaxing and recharging. But I wanted to share with you some of our experiences at Aviva of supporting colleagues from a mental health perspective, how we use people to support each other, and why we don't use mental health first aiders. Not that we don't agree that mental health first aiders work for some, we just don't choose to use them at Aviva. So let's give you a bit of a background first. Aviva has a wellbeing programme that covers Be Healthy, Be Mindful, Be Secure and Be Awesome, which looks after our physical, mental, financial and social everyday wellbeing. As part of our Be Mindful programme, colleagues have access to support from a prevention perspective and an intervention perspective. So lots of things like Headspace, free access to the app, a Thrive app. We have an employee assistance programme which provides support should people need to get counselling or instant emotional help. And we also have support through the Aviva DigiCare Plus Workplace app, where people can get mental health consultations and support, and also wider support for bereavement and grief. We also do a lot of campaigning internally around removing the stigma connected with mental health, and we talk about it as mental fitness and encourage people to think of it in the same way they do their physical fitness. So we've shared lots of first-person stories in our internal communications using the hashtag #MyStory, and we've found colleagues really willing to open up at all levels of the business about their personal journeys with mental health and mental ill health, particularly stress, depression, anxiety, and some of the challenges associated with those, as well as the official diagnosed conditions that people might have. And creating that open culture has created a psychological safety for people to be more open about it. And what that's meant is more people have wanted to talk to someone. So we've got the employee assistance programme, which is helpful for people, but we're often asked, should we have mental health first aiders? The concept of a mental health first aider is really good when you put it on a par with a physical first aider. So someone, by definition, who can provide immediate support in the moment of crises before passing them on to a more qualified professional. That's what physical first aid does, and ideally that's what mental health first aid should do. But quite often we found when we've had mental health buddies back at the beginning of the programme, Actually, what they were becoming was not about first aid, but about constant and ongoing support for colleagues. And that's not what first aid is about. And that's not what colleagues were particularly trained to do or support. And that's what our employee assistance programme is there for. But we did want to make sure colleagues felt like they had somewhere to go and someone to talk to and someone they needed help from. So instead of mental health first aiders, we've gone about training all our 2,500 people leaders across the UK with the same kind of information that would be available to mental health first aid training. So things like recognising mental ill health symptoms and signs, things like knowing where to signpost, both more broadly as well as Aviva's specific campaign, and also how to protect themselves and provide their own boundaries when supporting someone with mental ill health. And we chose people leaders because we already have a governance and audit process around our people leader programs where they can go and get additional support and we can help them, which we wouldn't have for mental health first aiders. So we have a leader advice team, specialist HR professionals who can support leaders with any challenges they might be facing, including supporting someone through a mental health journey. And we want our leaders to be the first place to go where people, if people want to talk about their mental health, we want that culture of psychological safety, and we want our leaders to be able to give that as part of their experience. And I think the one challenge we should all watch out for if you're considering introducing mental health first aiders, or you already have them on site, is what governance and support and, if you like, audit process do you have around the advice they give and the support they get as an individual. They could be, if they've got lived experience of mental ill health, tailoring their support to other people based on their own personal experiences, which could be dangerous because what's right for them might not be right for somebody else. Equally, they could be putting themselves at greater risk of being triggered if they're supporting someone with a condition similar to theirs, or that might trigger something in them. And while well-meaning, we don't want to put these people at risk. And if you've got no governance and audit process behind them, you don't know what they're saying, you don't know what they're telling people and how they can signpost and what help you can give people. So if you're planning on introducing them, that's great. Just think about how you create a supportive and governance structure behind them. Otherwise, you'll have unintended consequences, which might actually have a negative impact on the overall mental health of your organisation, which is the opposite of what you're trying to achieve. So do think carefully about what's right for you. And remember, whether it's mental health first aiders, training your people leaders or something else, that's one part of a broader jigsaw that you need to think about in how you create a psychological safe place so colleagues feel able to discuss their mental fitness and mental ill health in the workplace. And remember, one size doesn't fit all. Thanks. Hope the rest of the session is great.
So that was Debbie, obviously from Aviva, with a different experience. Apologies for those of you not in the room who were having essentially some feedback with the sound. We will be sharing this video after the presentation, so if you couldn't quite catch all of it, no worries and no problem, we will be sharing that. The next thing that we're going to move on to is a personal experience from one of our York Ending Stigma champions. Unfortunately, they're not able to join the session today. He's, for personal reasons, absolutely nothing to do with mental health, but he's not able to join us today. Really wanted to share his stuff in person, isn't able to do that. So one of our other champions, Reese, who is here, is going to come up and read out this other person's experience on their behalf.
I'm Reese, so I'll be reading this from a fellow champion. So it's titled A Positive Employer, How Can You Help? Hi, good afternoon. I am a York Ending Stigma champion, and I have a medical diagnosis of bipolar disorder type 2. I am aged 55, but was only diagnosed with this when I was 46 years old. For 25 years, I lived believing my original diagnosis of depression and anxiety were correct, and the roller coaster that was my life was simply down to my deformed personality, recklessness, selfish behavior, and I was unable to control the trauma and hell I kept putting myself and my family through. I would go through the same cycle. I would get a role, settling in for a year or two, and promise my wife that I would not get into the same pattern as I had previously. Slowly, I would start working longer hours, sometimes 60-hour weeks, and this would then increase so that I was working these for months on end. I would volunteer for extra shifts and even take work phone calls when I was on holiday abroad to find out my sales figures for the team. My life simply revolved around work, cutting out friends, family, and anything that would help relieve my stress bucket. Mr. Invincible had come to town again and knew everything, listened to no one, and was simply the best at his job. I would come home and constantly complain about things at work, such as why are other people not putting in the same effort as me? Why is my boss not seeing the things I'm seeing? Why am I the only one looking at the problems? I simply saw what I wanted to see. Then the Inventable came, and that I could only sustain the pace for so long and something would trigger the huge crash and burn that would lead to immediate depression. This depression would last for months and often would lead to me seeking a new role within the organization. How my wife and family put up with this for so long, I will never know or understand. It was hell. Then in 2014, whilst working for a national health organization, I was so lucky to chat to a GP who had an interest in mental health. It was whilst chatting that my wife explained the roller coaster that was our life. The GP immediately suggested bipolar disorder and sent me to see a psychiatrist. Within a month, I had a diagnosis by the psychiatrist with bipolar disorder type 2 and put on the correct medication. After 6 weeks and the medication settling down, I felt a sense of freedom and uplift, and I could return to work. However, when I returned to work, my line manager and HR appeared to deduce that I was a problem. My positives suddenly became my negatives, even labeled as obsessions. My qualities of being able to interpret stats and processes were now being highlighted as a hindrance to my work in other areas. And indirectly, it was made clear I was heading in one direction. So I took the decision to leave, spending time learning more about my condition and volunteering in a different environment. I did this for 18 months until finances dictated I needed to find paid employment. This time, it would be on better terms. I would be honest from day one about my condition. I would ensure I took a role where I could look after my mental health. And finally, I would be interviewing the prospective employer to ensure they were suitable for me. I applied for a role with a private call center in York. And I'd like to mention that it wasn't the one that we just heard from. At the interview, I was honest when explaining why I had left my previous role, the condition I had been diagnosed with, and how my medication had helped over the period I'd been volunteering. The two interviewers seemed surprised by my candor and appeared to react in a positive manner with their body language and what they said. But my expectations were low, as this was late 2015, where there was still a lot of stigma around mental health and employee welfare did not appear on their website. I asked to look around the call centre with only 8 call takers and the warehouse, and it seemed a really friendly place. I arrived home and said to my wife, it was nice, but I was not hopeful. To my surprise, 2 days later, they rang and offered me the position with a start date of 2 weeks, and an extremely nervous 2 weeks it was. I arrived for my first morning to meet my line manager, one of the interviewers, and she explained that one of the reasons that I was successful was my honesty and trust that I had placed in them speaking about my conditions. The other main reason was my knowledge of larger call centers, processes and stats with what they needed to grow. I was now in a customer service administration, and this role played to my strengths. My line manager asked me if we could have an open and honest conversation regarding my condition. My heart rate doubled, waiting for the next sentence. She explained she had done some research regarding my condition, the symptoms and triggers, and wanted to formulate a plan to help me at work. The piece of paper she presented me asked me the following questions. What signs would tell my line managers I was starting to enter an elevated mood? What could they do to alert me to this happening and me realize I was maybe regressing? If I would not accept this, would I be happy if they rang my emergency contact, my wife, to let her know their concerns and possibly arrange for a medical appointment? How often did I want to have a well-being chat, not a performance review about my work, but a proper coffee and chat, which could even take place away from the office? We agreed that the main thing to watch out for was working over my hours too much. Yes, they could contact my wife, and we would meet once a month initially, and then after a while, once a quarter. I also explained about my medication and how that worked. For a couple of years, the relationship worked really well, and I loved the role, the atmosphere in the call center and the organization. We got the job done, always achieving target, but in the right way, looking after each other and being there for each other. We even started to grow and take on new staff who also liked the way that we worked. However, as happens with some organizations, it grew from 8 call takers to 40 call takers, and the turnover increased considerably. A new sales manager joined, and with a new brush, there was a clean sweep. The current line managers at the time were not considered by the senior management to be sales orientated enough, and managers from a large call center where the sales manager had come from joined the organization. Suddenly, staff welfare was no longer a priority, and it was clear that managers in the organization saw those with mental health issues on the records as potential problems or weak. Several staff who had this on their personal records were made to feel they were unwanted, and problems with their work started to surface. So my excellent experience and that I had done with my wonderful line manager was soon quickly ignored. And a lot of the original staff left, being replaced by the new manager's old colleagues. There was no consideration of investment in training staff in mental health first aid, and there was no one that any member of staff experiencing any signs of anxiety, stress, or other mental health conditions talked to, whether work-related or not. Simply, if you had to take time off for any of these issues, you had your card marked, as one manager described it. Again, I had the luxury of being able to leave on my own terms and went to volunteer for the organization I now work for. Again, I have been lucky in that I found another great manager to work with who was understanding and knowledge of mental health awareness. Having looked back at my experience with the private call centre, I realised that the problem was not the managers themselves who managed the staff, as they could have simply been ignorant of what is a mental health condition, may not have experienced mental health issues themselves, or may simply not know what to do to support somebody with mental health issues. I believe that the problem was the organisation had a lack of a staff welfare programme. I think they recruited the wrong type of managers who saw people with mental health conditions as faulty and weak. They saw those employees who had either had or were having mental health issues as potential problems, who, if needed time off ill, would be a loss to their turnover potential and cost themselves and money. I think they failed to see my strengths that my condition brought to my role, such as my work with stats and processing, as a benefit. If organisations such as the one I experienced invested in a good, focused employee framework that gives managers and colleagues the tools to see the positivity about mental health, and those in the line management having the tools to help people when they are struggling, rather than writing them off, this can only be a benefit. This potentially could lead to the organisation having its employees talking to friends and family, potentially new employees and clients, about the wonderful conditions and treatment that they receive at the organisation, the programme the organisation has for employee welfare. Those new employees will follow this mindset of the organisation from the start of their induction and training, learning that they can talk openly about mental health and welfare rather than hide it with shame and stigma. An organisation who takes up this mantle, investing in having a robust framework, such as YES has drawn up, and allotting training time for staff for mental health awareness, employee well-being, and potential well-being champions helping other employees, can be a beacon in the employment market and community that they work in. After all, I think we are simply all human beings who need to have to look after our own mental health as well as our colleagues to make a better organisation. Thank you.
Thank you, Rhys, excuse me, for reading that. And just whilst you all take a moment to digest that, I'm going to stop the recording, so just bear with me whilst I do the tech. I will also stop sharing the screen, and if people joining us via Zoom, if you want to put your cameras on so it's a bit more friendly when we can see each other for the Q&A.